so I can talk with you.
So let me ask you this, Dan. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you as always.
I've known you since I was 17.
Oh my goodness, or maybe even younger than that. Because
I was at Munford's and you came in.
Is that right?
Remember Munford's?
Oh yes, absolutely.
I mean, if that dates me.
Oh yes, that dates me. But I want to, before we really get started, I want to tell you a story that I've told several people, and I think it'll mean a lot to you. And you know, we have been with Farm Bureau Insurance for forever. Mm-hmm. I think my wife grew up with Farm Bureau Insurance. Of course, you are pretty familiar with one of the former agents. Well, your dad always had a special place in my heart and in the heart of my family, because when the big tornado came through in the early 90s, we got hit hard. We lost half our roof and a storage shed and just numerous things. And we were devastated, like a lot of people. And I'll never forget, and this is a scene that is embedded in my memory forever and ever, and I share it with people. Your dad, who's not a tall man, climbing over downed trees that morning. Uh-huh. I mean, it hadn't been light long, and we're literally standing there wondering, what in the world are we going to do? And here comes your dad, Robert Burris, up our driveway, having to climb over these huge trees that had fallen. And the thing he was careful about was not to drop the checkbook.
Oh.
He wrote us a check that of course, it didn't cover everything, but he said, I'll never forget. He said, Dan, this will help get you back on your feet. This will get you started. Mm-hmm. And you know, Dee, you don't forget things like that.
I've got stuff like that my whole life. People, they do stuff for me that they don't even realize they've done it. Yeah. And I just, what is it about those moments? Is it that we're in a predicament and we feel like there's somebody on our side? Or?
Well, you know, I guess it could be argued that your dad was doing his job. But at 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, climbing over those down trees to get to us.
He could have very easily said, hey, I'll be down tomorrow.
Absolutely. Or I'll send an adjuster down, which I'm sure might have been standard operating procedure. Yeah. Bob Burris was there that morning with that checkbook and literally put us back in a state of mind where we could kind of deal with the losses and deal with the damage. And I'll just tell you, I'll never forget that as long as I live. And he'll always have a special place in our hearts and in the hearts of my family for what he did that morning, because I think it was above and beyond.
You know, he was probably had come from another place and going to another.
Probably so.
He didn't let things lay very long.
No, and he knew we needed him to. So anyway, I wanted to kind of kick off with that. Because,
you know, that reminds me of something. I was at an auction years ago on Georgetown Road, and I had bid on a piece of property, and I didn't have any money. And the Reimer guy that had the gas stations.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
He outbid everybody when they put all the property together. And I never will forget that guy. Because once he did, then I was off the hook.
Oh, I see. You were wondering what in this world.
And he didn't even know me from Adam.
And I don't think you intended
but I was thinking,
you didn't think you were going to win that, did you?
I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know why I bid on it. I had no money. Crazy. But we always go through life with people helping us like that, and we can name. Isn't it funny that we can name just 20 of them or 10?
Yeah. Well, you hope that life doesn't throw you that many crisis moments where, you know, that's someone that comes through for you.
Even a thing that was a crisis to you in the moment.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you got a special dad. I hope he's doing well.
I think, he's doing good.
Good.
He's retired.
Oh, yes. Yes. We miss him.
He's got the first vaccine shot. I guess you saw it on the news. He was the first one.
Was he? Yeah. Well, good for him.
Have you had the COVID?
I have had one shot. Now, I've also had the COVID, and I'm glad you asked me that question.
Did you have it early or?
I had it in November, so I guess you could say it was about the time the numbers were starting to pick up, and we were really beginning to feel it in the community. And one thing that has bothered me is that there are still a number of people, Dee, and I know you see them every day in the box stores and elsewhere, who, not out of ignorance, because I don't think there's any way anyone can honestly say they don't know that there is a problem out there.
Yeah, there's a problem.
So I don't think it's ignorance. I think it's more of a political statement. But I see people, and I believe me, I avoid going into the box stores. I would say like the plague, but literally that's true. And it bothers me to see these people making a political statement because of misinformation that we were given early on, that this is some sort of a government conspiracy or something that really, once the temperature goes up or down, is going to go away. These things, unfortunately, I believe were embedded in people's minds. And what I really have a hard time doing, Dee, is wishing that these people could lay up there in Tonova for 5 days like I did. I don't want that for them. I want them to realize that to go out here without a mask and parade around in these stores making a political statement is not out of ignorance, it's stupidity. And there is such a difference. These people are stupid. And one reason I don't go into them anymore is you can still hear me mumble under my mask, and somebody's going to probably level me one of these days in one of the aisles for what I have to say. But anyone that has had a serious dose of this, I'm sure that they realize how serious and how deadly this is, and how the misinformation that we were given months and months ago has led to the crisis that we have today, at least to a certain extent. Because when you have your most trusted leaders telling the public that this is not something they need to worry about, that it's going to go away, no problem. Yeah, it is a problem. And I just wish that people would wake up and realize we're all in this together. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Patriot Party, whatever it is. We're
That's irrelevant.
Absolutely. It couldn't be any more irrelevant.
You might as well say, I don't wear a mask because I wear blue shirts.
Exactly.
Makes as much sense.
Or worse yet, I was told I don't need to worry about it. You see, that to me was the most egregious breach of leadership I've ever seen in my 70 years. Being politically interested in what is going on, both on the national, state, and local level.
You don't look 70. Are you 70?
I just turned 70.
Boy, you don't
well,
look
thank you. I appreciate it.
Golly.
The weight I've gained has kind of filled my face out, I guess. It makes me look younger.
But you don't look at that. You're
well,
not
I feel every bit of it. I can tell you that at times. But and I feel very fortunate to have made it this long. Especially having dealt with the virus recently.
But I always think about the surgeon. You never see a surgeon going in to do surgery without a mask.
Correct.
So what's that for?
I don't know.
If it's for something.
Yeah. Well, the same people who refuse to wear the mask, and again, I believe they're making a political statement that is just idiocy, in my opinion, are the same people that probably, in all likelihood, buckle their seatbelt. They put on a coat.
Helmet when they ride a motorcycle.
Absolutely. Well, most of them. Anyway.
Yeah.
You've always got those few, but for the majority.
But even that's personal. You're only hurting yourself.
Yeah.
With a mask.
Exactly. And so I hope that the vaccines will get distributed as we hope they will in a short period of time, and maybe we can get a handle on this. But in the meantime, we've got to put the politics aside. Put the misinformation in its place, and let's all get vaccinated. Let's wear our mask. Let's do the right thing by ourselves and for the people that we are around. And it's just common sense is what it boils down to.
And probably in 60 to 90 days, this will all be, as people get, they're vaccinating so many every day. And I watch the numbers on World Meter. You ever watch World Meter?
No, I don't.
Oh, it tells you how many across the world's got it and how many in every state and every country and every city. You can go all the way down. And so I'm waiting to see, as people get vaccinated, if it's going to come down.
Well, I hope so. I mean, we've got to trust that the science and the medical people are trying to lead us in the right directions. Anyway, that I don't see that they have a political motive. Their motive, I believe, is pure and just, and it is to get a handle on this as quickly as possible, so that as few people as possible need to lay in a hospital or, worse yet, in a morgue because they've been exposed to this.
And it's been March of last year we started hearing about it pretty heavily?
It was March, April of last year, back when...
Not the 1st of March, towards the end of March?
Yeah, because as you know, I work seasonally at the Bradley County Trustee's office, and of course, February is the big month because February 28th is the deadline for getting the tax in for that current tax cycle. And so we're very, very busy in the month of February, especially towards the end. And there were no concerns about masks or limiting the number of people in the office. I don't know that we were even using hand sanitizer.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, and again, partly because I think most of us were listening to our leaders who said this is going to be a minor blip on the radar and it's going to go away when the cold weather goes away or whatever that we were being told. And it just didn't happen. So let's hope that we have better times ahead. I welcome 2021 with welcome arms and open arms because it's got to be better.
What's the saying? Hindsight's 2020.
Oh yes, oh yes, absolutely.
Do you wake up in the morning and think, boy, I'm glad I'm not the sheriff?
I have had that experience, and at the same time, Dee, I've got to say that, once it's in your system and it's been there for 20 years, and I was with the department for 28 years total, it becomes a part of you, and people they'll ask me, well, was that your plan? Did you plan to go into law enforcement? Was that something you had always dreamed of? And I can tell them honestly, I can look them straight in the eye and say, if I had made a list of 1,000 things when I was in high school or college that I thought I would do, for the majority of my career, 1,000 things, law enforcement wouldn't even have been on the list. Nonetheless,
that's very interesting.
On the bottom, no, it was the furthest thing from my mind. It had never entered my mind, as a matter of fact, as a possibility.
How did that come about?
Well, it all had to do with a decision that I made after I actually went back after I graduated, finished up my work on my my degree on political science at what became the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I was a member of the last freshman class of the University of Chattanooga. And so halfway through my freshman year, they announced they were going to be absorbed into the Tennessee system, become UT Chattanooga. So I thought, well, I'll hang around and see how that works out. So what if you don't go to law school? A political science degree, really, there's not a big living there to be had. So what I did is I went back for an extra summer and a semester and was certified in secondary education. So I was set to teach and had a teaching job. But in the meantime, I'd been working at the Goodyear store down in Market Street in Chattanooga. And it started out in Rossville, but was transferred to Market Street. And I got up that morning that I finished up and had a job offer at Northside Junior High School in Chattanooga.
You were all excited?
Well, I hadn't made up my mind. I had a little apartment up on Missionary Ridge. Got up that morning and I was either going to pull into the Goodyear store and accept their offer for, I was going to go onto their sales management training program and credit manager training program, or I was going to go ahead and cross the bridge and go up to Northside Junior High School. And I put on my coat and tie that morning and I didn't know where I was going. Had no idea.
So you wake up that morning, you could go one or the other.
One or the other. Had a sure job. Whichever place I went first was going to be my career and my future.
Who did you call and ask?
Well, I just, on my way in.
I mean, did you call a friend and say, hey?
No, I didn't get any guidance. I guess I passed the Goodyear store and had to come to a stop at a stoplight and I could see the store up ahead of me.
So you hadn't decided at that point?
No. And I pulled into Goodyear. Went inside, I immediately called the principal up at Northside Junior High School. Of course, he wasn't upset a bit. They had a lot of people lined up for that job. It wasn't that they couldn't fill it immediately. One of the teachers was going on she was maternity leave, and then she wasn't going to come back, basically. So the job was going to be permanent, but they had no trouble filling it. And I wound up with Goodyear. Well, to make a long story even a little bit longer, and I apologize for that, after a couple of stops with Goodyear, I was assigned the Goodyear store here in Cleveland as credit sales manager. And came up to Cleveland, and again...
You were from Cleveland?
No. I actually was born in Texas.
Okay.
My dad was assigned temporarily to the Air Force there at Lackland.
How'd you get to Chattanooga?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? He wound up at the Marietta plant of Lockheed. He was an aeronautical engineer And so we moved. I grew up in the suburbs back then, what was the suburbs of Atlanta, off Moores Mill Road in Atlanta. And after I finished up my studies at Margaret Mitchell Elementary School, we moved right outside of the city limits. My dad bought a new house outside the city limits, which meant that I didn't go to the Atlanta public schools. I went to the Fulton County schools, and the school that I wound up going to for high school was Sandy Springs, which is no longer there. They tore it down because it was on too valuable a piece of property to leave it standing. But anyway, at the time it was standing and it was there. And so I went to Sandy Springs High School, and then was intending to go to Georgia. And this was 1968. And I knew myself well enough to know, based on my experiences in high school, that if I went to a large university like Georgia, the chances were really good that I might not make the grades. So I decided to come to Chattanooga with several of my friends from Sandy Springs who were already accepted into Chattanooga. My dad retired that just prior to that summer, just after I graduated from high school, and he opened up a print shop down in the Florida Keys. So I spent that summer in Marathon. We lived on Marathon Shores, and he had a print shop. And I actually called from the Keys to the admissions office at the University of Chattanooga and asked them if there was any way that I might be considered. And after a few questions, apparently they needed to add to their freshman class because they accepted me over the telephone based on a few things that they asked me. So, long story long, I came up to University of Chattanooga. Every intention to transfer to Georgia my sophomore year, and liked it. I joined a fraternity, and of course my friends were there from high school, and I decided, well, maybe this is where I need to be, and so I stayed on at Chattanooga and graduated. Went to work for Goodyear part-time, which usually was not part-time, but and then when I graduated, stayed with Goodyear and wound up in Cleveland.
Now, how long were you here? Where was the Goodyear store? Then?
Down on Inman Street. It's where Family Tire is located.
Family Tire,
now,
right.
Yep. And but
now my uncle used to work there, Jim Ornby. Did you know him by any chance?
No, it might have been after my time though, probably.
Maybe before.
This was 74, 73, 74.
That was probably before. He used. I think he managed that store, then went to Dalton to manage that.
Okay. Might have been a little before my time then.
So then you came along.
I came along as credit sales manager, which basically assistant manager. And Goodyear and I had an understanding at the time, and of course I don't know if you really have an understanding with a corporation the size of Goodyear, but it was my understanding anyway, that if I was to be given a store as store manager, it would be somewhere in East Tennessee, and I had family reasons to stay in East Tennessee at the time. And I found out that I was going to get a store, become store manager, but it was over in Middle Tennessee. And when I protested that I thought we had an understanding, I was told either take it or leave it, being take the store or leave the company. And I left under good graces. It wasn't any, no lawsuits or, that kind of thing. Yeah. But what it did make me realize is that if you decide to throw your fate into the hands of a large corporation, they can move you. They can basically do whatever they want to with you as long as you decide that that's who you want to stay hooked up with. So I thought, well, maybe that's not for me. And so I was between careers. My 2 weeks notice was coming up, and one of the friends that I'd gone to school with in Sandy Springs and who had graduated from UTC, he called me. He was working for the Times Free Press, and he said, have you ever thought about being a newspaper reporter? And I said, well, I've written a few papers in my day, but I've never reported on anything as such. And he said, well, they've got an opening for a police reporter at the Cleveland Banner. You might want to go over and ask him about it.
Well, it was nice of him, wasn't it?
It was. It was very nice of him. And so I went over to the Banner there on 25th Street, and Beecher Hunter was in his office. And Beecher kindly allowed me to come in and make my case for perhaps being considered for the opening. And he said, of course, what experience do you have? Well, I'm just a 22, 23-year-old kid. I didn't have any experience with newspapers.
But I've got 2 years of college.
Well, yeah, and he said, well, you've probably written a few papers. I'm sure he said that in the course of our conversation. But that was the day that I discovered how kind and what a gentleman Beecher Hunter is.
He certainly is.
There is no question.
If you think he's nice, you ought to meet his wife.
Oh, I have many times. They are
She's
one
the nicest
beautiful
person
couple.
in the world.
Beautiful couple. But Beecher was so kind to me that day, and so he said, okay, well, you're going to have to try out. And he handed me someone's handwritten notes that they had taken at a garden party of some sort. It was some sort of a women's club meeting. And he said, if you can make an article out of this, we'll consider you. Well, he said, go out into the newsroom and there'll be a empty desk. Just use whatever empty desk is out there. Well, there was only one, and it belonged to Brooke Healy. Brooke Healy was a very lovely young lady that worked there, and she happened to be off that day. And Brooke was the only person in the newsroom that still used the old clunky manual typewriter. We back then we had electric typewriters, okay? We didn't have the hammer and chisel.
She used the old.
She liked the old style. Well, of course, I hadn't used one of those in years. Well, I finally suffered through it and got a decent article written and took it back into Beecher, and he read it. He sat there and he shook his head up and down, and he said, well, I believe we'll give you a try. And so I became the new police government reporter for the Cleveland Daily
Now, when
Banner.
you're sitting there writing this thing, or you're thinking, should I just go to Middle Tennessee?
Well, thoughts crossed my mind, yes. Maybe this isn't for
Because
me.
you've mentioned two big crossroads.
Yes, that's true. That is true. And it was Beecher's decision. And I guess people can either blame him or give him credit, whichever they think is most appropriate.
Had you known
For
him
me staying
before,
here.
or is that
Never met Beecher, and just I look back on the kindness. Not only that he showed me that day, but I worked the first time with the Banner for about a year and a half, and then I went back for a short period of time after I left the sheriff's office, and we can get into that if you want to, because that was another.
So why did you write stories like report, like you'd like go to the planning commission and write
No, they usually leave that to people who had more experience. If it was something that in depth. So I would cover the police beat and the fire department and
around town,
and then city and county government, their meetings.
How about around town?
No, didn't do around town. That would be somebody else's. Yeah. But so I would every morning. Of course, we had a deadline of around 10:30 in the morning to get the Banner in, to get our articles in for that day's edition. So I would hit the police beat around 6:30, and I would usually stop at the sheriff's office, go through the basket, read the reports, make some notes, make some copies. Of course, they didn't have a copy machine, so I'd make some notes. Go over to the city, go through the alley, go to the city police department there on First Street, and do the same thing there. Talk to the officers, usually at roll call, see what was going on. Go back through the fire department and get their reports and read. And then I'd go back and do my police stories. And then in the afternoon or at noon, usually there was, on Mondays, there was the city council meeting. And I would get to go spend some time and really enjoyed covering those meetings, because back then it was people who are so important to the history of the city of Cleveland. People like Harry Death Row, Kenneth Tinsley, Eddie Cartwright.
Were they more colorful then?
Oh
would you
my
say?
goodness, absolutely! It was so much fun. Tom Rowland was there,
and they were all friends.
Absolutely. And they might not agree on everything, and they might disagree openly, but then after the meeting's over, we'd all pile into the cars and go have lunch, and Harry Death Row would hand out cigars to everybody, and it was just a wonderful time, because it was different in government, even in county government. Now, let me date myself a bit. I'm covering the county court, okay, not the county commission.
That was Eddie Cartwright, right?
Well, no county. Oh no, it goes back further than that. The county court back then was
Carl Collins. No.
Carl was our county judge.
County judge.
He was the last county judge, actually, to preside. They changed the form of government, or at least the titles, so that it became county executive. Of course, now it's county mayor. Yeah. But back then, Carl Collins was our county judge, and we had 14 squires They were known as squires. Now, this was before your dad was elected to the. He was elected to the commission, I would guess. But back then in the 70s, it was actually it was called the Quarterly Court. Now, it got that name because usually it would only come to meet on a quarterly basis, or at least once every 3 months, because people had to come from so far, and frankly, there was so little business to be done, usually in county government at that time, that they could get away with one meeting every 3 months. But the Quarterly Court became the what we now know as the County Commission, but getting back to my coverage of the police beat, this is where I began to look differently at law enforcement, because it gets in your blood. It really does. I'm not only reading the reports and talking to the officers. Of course, back then, Lamar Lawson had just been elected sheriff. Bernard Snyder was our police chief. Colorful people, people who are right for the times.
Sam Cannon had already gone.
Sam Cannon was gone. Lamar went in September of '74. He had been elected. He defeated Bill Gibson, who served a 2-year term. And then back then, up until '74, sheriffs could only serve 3 consecutive 2-year terms, and then they had to sit out a term. We've never had a sheriff in history of Bradley County serve more than 4 terms. One served 2 and then sat out a while, came back and served 2 more. Sam served 2. He ran for county judge and was defeated. Then he came back and was reelected as sheriff, but there was that 2-year gap in between. But anyway, so I began to really get interested in police work. And
what interested you about it?
I think the excitement. I think everybody, if they're honest with themselves, that has a career in law enforcement would say, number one, it is exciting. There's no 2 days that are ever the same. And anything is liable to happen at any minute.
2 o'clock in the morning.
2 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it doesn't matter. And then of course there's long stretches where nothing happens. And then all of a sudden there's total excitement. And I think the other thing too is I generally enjoyed helping people. And I've enjoyed that my entire career, and that is even spilled over into my service at the county trustee's office.
You might have been doing that at Goodyear.
I think so too. I believe so. We tried to give them good service.
You weren't moving up in the ranks by accident there.
Well, no, and I believe obviously Goodyear's a great company, and it has great products. And at the time, we sold appliances, stereos, and televisions.
Yeah.
People that go back far enough to remember, we had riding lawnmowers and push mowers back then, and we always had good quality products. So, but I found myself one day, one of the deputies had to leave, and back then there was only 12 deputies. And
12 deputies and a sheriff.
And a sheriff and a chief deputy, and then they had 3 dispatchers and 3 detectives. That was the total department. But one of the deputies had to leave, and Lamar was sitting on the couch in what was back then the squad room or the shift room in the old jail on 2nd Street. Okay, I'm going 3 jails back now, and I don't know what hit me, but he was sitting there, and I thought, well, I'll ask and let's see what happens. And I said, Lamar, would you?
Because you wanted to be in the game.
I wanted to be part of it. Yeah. And of course, I didn't call him Lamar. I said, Sheriff Lawson, would you consider me for that opening? And it didn't matter that I had a college degree. Now we're talking 1975, okay? It didn't matter, that I had the education. He looked at me and honestly, he said, well, I believe you're big enough to handle it. And so I passed the test, and he gave me a chance, and I'll never forget him for that. And I admire Lamar Lawson to this day. He was tough. He was no nonsense. He was exactly what Bradley County needed at the time. Now, would his style and philosophies necessarily transcend into today's law enforcement? Probably not.
Or would that type of guy figure it out?
Well, that's possible.
Yeah, it's possible.
Because I went to work at one of the most interesting times in law enforcement in Bradley County and Cleveland, because I was able to come in under the tutelage of the old school. And
Sam Cannon.
There were some tough people there. Oh my goodness.
Now down in John Kinder's office, on his refrigerator, he's got a picture of Sam Cannon and Troy Dixon's dad busting up a still with rifles. So you were coming right in at the the old guard.
Exactly. Well, up until I think Jarvis Gibson was acting sheriff in 1970 when he was appointed. Well, actually, he was. I don't know that he was appointed. I'm not sure, but he was chief deputy, and the sheriff at the time left to take a job out of the county. And so Jarvis was the last sheriff to live in the jail on 2nd Street. It was built and designed for the upstairs to be the sheriff's residence. There was 2 bedrooms and a bathroom between the 2. Of course, then you would eat out of the kitchen. There was a dining room, which became.
I've been up there. It does look like a house.
It was designed that way, and Wendell Davis took a job up in Athens as their safety director. Jarvis became the acting sheriff, and he was the last one to actually live in the jail itself. But Lamar gave me that chance in June of 1975, and while it was, it was a different time because they're the old school, good people. Now I'm not criticizing or at all because they were from a different era. The Paul Bakers and the Paul comes to mind as one of my favorites, but there were so many back then and Jarvis Gibson was a constable, I believe, at the time, or a court officer. But anyway, they were entering into a new era, and so whether or not they would have ever been able to transcend, I don't know. Some did. I'll give you some good examples. Danny and Dewey Chastain. Dewey was acting sheriff too. He's one of our former sheriffs. Of course, he's passed away now, but Danny is still with us, and they came in like me in the old school, the old way of doing things, and transcended beautifully into careers. Both of them retired from the Cleveland Police Department after long, good careers, solid careers. So we had quite a few that did that, but there's some that just would have never been able to change. Now, another good example, Robert Lawson, who I was honored to serve as his chief deputy for 6 years just prior to me becoming sheriff. And Robert Lawson is a perfect example of the young, the new breed that came in the middle 70s here in Bradley County, made the transition into the modern era, and he literally led us into what was back then, of course, the 1980s, which was the time that the department really began to become a modern department that was based on sound principles of good law enforcement, and he led that. I mean, he started that, and then basically when he left to become safety commissioner and handed the baton off to me, we just continued, its development and its modernization.
It became more of not a business, but more of an administration than just.
Well, Robert and I had a great working relationship in that he wasn't interested in the duties of the administrative sheriff. He was very interested and very, very, very good at the law enforcement aspect of being sheriff. In fact, he was his own chief detective. He was probably one of the best detectives that has ever been in Cleveland or Bradley County. And so he allowed me as chief deputy to handle the administrative area of the sheriff's office, which went a long way to help prepare me to become sheriff in a more modern era, but also gave me an opportunity to help him in a constructive way to build a department and to change the nature and change
allowed him
the
to focus on the law enforcement.
Absolutely.
That was a big
like
help.
I said, he was very, very good at it, yes. And so when I was appointed, when he went on to become safety commissioner under Ned McWhirter, I was appointed by the county commission at the time to become the sheriff, and that would have been in January of 1987. And so I felt, and I told the commission at the time that I was prepared, I was ready, that I had been doing the administrative things for 6 years, been writing policies and procedures, doing budgets, which of course at the time were small, looking back on them now, but and doing the things that I believed a sheriff would need to be able to do in the future. Not so much the field work or the investigative work. That would be left to other people. That would be left to those people who we train to do those jobs. Mm-hmm. That the sheriff was going to become an administrator in the future, and that's exactly what's happened.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
You could not operate. There's probably more procedures and policies with being a sheriff now than there is with actually law enforcement at all.
Well, it was in the 80s that we actually became aware of the fact that there were certain minimum standards that jails must meet, for instance, because up until the early 80s or late 70s, it really didn't matter. We were in the old jail on 2nd Street.
Was there any standards then other than...
There were standards that we couldn't possibly meet in that building.
Who watches the standards?
Well, the Tennessee Corrections Institute, and then ultimately the courts, because that's where Bradley County wound up in 1978, was in the courts. We were sued. This was while I was director.
So it's all okay till you get sued.
You can get away with a lot until the courts become aware that you're not meeting even the minimal standards. And the Bradley County Jail had been condemned by at least 10, 12 grand juries up until that point. It had failed every jail inspection, but it was not necessarily the fault of the Sheriff's Department. I think that the Sheriff's Department did everything it could do to meet what standards it could and to make that jail as humane as possible. But I was juvenile court director at the time in the late 70s, and I had, in fact, there's 3 names that are listed on the lawsuit that led to the county being forced basically to build a new jail. And one of those was one of the juveniles that I had incarcerated in that old jail, if you can imagine. And so as a result of the lawsuit and the decisions of the courts, the Bradley County did construct a new jail over on Johnson Boulevard, and that's the one that we, and I say we, the new Robert Lawson administration, we inherited it after the slabs had been poured and a few of the walls were going up. So we didn't have a big opportunity to have a lot of input into its actual design. We had to live with what we inherited, and it
wasn't that a big jump from 12 people, 3 dispatchers, 4 dispatchers, and 3 detectives to Johnson Boulevard?
Well, we had actually begun to build the department as far as numbers because.
But in a short frame time.
Well, when we opened the new jail on Johnson Boulevard, we opened it with 36, if I'm not mistaken, 36 or 37 correctional officers.
That's still not many, is
Not
it?
many, but the jail itself was only designed to hold 180 inmates. So we thought, well, that, and it turned out to be relatively adequate until we surpassed that 180 and started housing 200, 210, 230, 250, and then when you have a jail that's that crowded,
and did the courts get slower? I'm guessing that maybe the courts get slower and people are in jail longer.
Well,
is there some of that?
Yes, and that depends on a lot of factors, but there'll always be a backlog. I don't know that the courts could ever get caught up on the backlog of cases now that COVID has hit. It's just 10 times worse.
They may never catch up.
They very well may never catch up. But we did our best at Johnson Boulevard. We had a lot of issues to deal with there, and the design was very poor, and so we had issues that I won't go into a lot of detail, but we made it last as long as it was possible. And of course it became so overcrowded that the county commission then decided in 2002 that it was time to replace it. And so that's when we went into the design phase and designed the Justice Center and jail that we have now down on Blythe Avenue. And it's a good solid design. It was designed to be what we call direct supervision, which means the officers would actually work inside of what the common person would know as cell block, but we call them pods, and they would actually work inside. Their workstation would be inside with the inmates, which I know sounds a little scary when you figure that some of the pods may house more than 50 inmates. Now, under the crowding, it could house even more. But actually, the concept is solid, and it was endorsed by the National Institute of Corrections, the federal courts, and so we looked at that design and decided that would be what would be best for Bradley County. Although it would require a little more staff than a regular linear style jail, or the what I call catch me if you can style jail, where maybe they're under surveillance by cameras. But I mean, inmates can figure all that out.
Sure,
they know.
They got all day to figure it out.
They do, and they're most of them are very, very smart. And so we went with direct supervision, and so we opened the new jail in 2004. I'm sorry, we started designing in 2002. Opened in 2004. And we had a staff of 96, so we increased it from 30 some odd up to 96.
And y'all, that jail takes in others from other areas, right?
No. We never have had that luxury, to be honest with you. Now, we do have federal inmates, and we signed a contract when we had the space available.
Oh, so now there's...
Well, I'm not sure what the status is. I know that contract was going to be renewed, but it is a very lucrative income flow for the county. The last I heard, I think a federal inmate was for holding a federal inmate, the county was getting somewhere around $65 to $70 a day. So you multiply that by an average of 60 to 70 federal inmates a day, and it's a pretty good income stream. Yeah, it's a good income stream, and generally that is an easy population to manage. Because, and I'll tell you why, their conduct while being housed temporarily at the Bradley County Jail or wherever it may be, see, they're awaiting sentencing for the most part. They've been tried, they're awaiting sentencing. So their conduct, any write-ups, what have you, will be weighed as to where they will be assigned in the federal system. So they might wind up in a relatively, and I say relatively, comfortable medium security facility, or they might wind up in Atlanta.
Depending on their behavior here.
Exactly. And so when they are ready to enter into the federal system, the people who make those decisions will look at the reports and will look at their conduct. And so, of course, there's been exceptions, I'm sure, over the years, but for the most part, that's an easy group to manage, and so for that reason. And so that makes it even more lucrative to hold federal inmates, as long as you've got the space. And
I can imagine the logistics of just, as just a citizen, we see, they arrest this guy or they take him in for drunk driving. That's the end of it. But as far as a policeman's concerned, or sheriff's, they're trying to figure out to do all the paperwork. Where's he going to stay?
Oh, yeah.
How long is he going to stay there? I mean, the logistics of that would be mind-boggling.
Well, the jail staff in any situation, but especially here in Bradley County, they do not get the credit that they deserve for being such an important part of the criminal justice system.
It's almost maybe the most important part, in a sense. Because when you get them, if you can't keep them there, what's the point?
Well, and the main goal, well, there's actually several goals within corrections, but the main goal, of course, is public safety, to ensure as best you can that those who are being incarcerated, especially those that may be a danger to society, are held there and are not allowed to escape.
Yeah.
Secondly, of course, is staff safety, and then third would be the safety of the inmates, and so all of these things, all these considerations they all have to be met, and so it's a science. It really is, and it's not an easy job. And I appreciated my correctional officers. I knew the tough job that they had. I always tried to make the working environment as good as we could, and to make sure that if nothing else, they knew they were appreciated by management, that they knew that we knew how important they were.
If we hadn't have built that jail, what would have happened?
Oh, we would have been in another lawsuit. There's no question.
I mean, what would you do? Would the sheriff or the person in charge say, "Hey, don't pick up so many"?
No, you're never going to do that. No sheriff.
But where would you put them?
Well, you'd have to keep cramming them in until finally, one of two things is going to happen. Either Tennessee Corrections Institute will fail to certify you and to give you your certification, which means you might lose your insurance, you would lose
So
income from the state.
So that the county could be sued for liability.
Oh, that's step number 2, would be once you lose your certification.
So that's the
that
real
opens
reason.
up the lawsuits. Yeah.
So do you want to spend money on this new jail, or do you want to spend the money on lawsuits?
Well, even worse, the federal courts can appoint a person to come in and basically take over your jail and administer your jail.
Rightfully so, if you can't.
And to oversee the construction. And if you lose that authority to the federal courts and to a person that's assigned that job by the federal courts, you're probably going to build a facility that will cost twice as much as what
you almost have to be like buying clothes for kids that are 7, 8 years old. Buy something they're going to grow into.
That's exactly right.
Because you can't build what you need.
Yes.
You'd be out. We're getting 17,000 new citizens a day in Bradley County.
Well, there's a lot of factors that go into it.
Of course, they're not all going to jail, but in theory, that's 10 more or 5 more.
And activity or conduct that might have been acceptable back in the 70s and maybe early 80s into the 90s is no longer acceptable by society.
That's very interesting.
Yes.
Give me an example.
Drunk driving.
So in the 70s, you could
perfect example.
You could leave a place, a bar, drunk driving. They catch you, send you home.
Well, or frankly, I'm gonna tell one on ourselves because this is the way it was. I mean, it was a different time and a different era.
It was the procedure.
Bradley County at the time, counties did not receive any of the fine from a DUI arrest and conviction. Therefore, there was no income for the county from a DUI arrest. And so many nights, Friday, Saturday nights, we would make the arrests. I mean, we'd fall in behind someone who couldn't keep it on the pavement. Mm-hmm. And we would make the arrest, but they would be charged with public drunkenness. And maybe even driving without a license. Now, the judges, one in particular, who I won't call a name, but he would have a good time when we would have to, of course, go to court with these people and prosecute them on a charge of public drunkenness and driving without a license. And I had one judge ask me one time when I had an individual charged that way, he said, "Now, you tell me that he was driving his bar stool without a license?" I just laughed. I said, "No, Judge, that's not exactly it." They knew. I mean, they knew.
And if you're a drunk driver, you'd prefer that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because there's not a record.
No.
Now, the state
and it did the same thing. It got him off the road.
Absolutely, but only temporarily.
Yeah.
The state recognizes that that's not the way to do business. And, of course, the wonderful groups, Moms Against Drunk Driving and other groups, enlightened us to the true dangers. And so new laws were passed, and we're going to use drunk driving as an example. First offense, 48 hours minimum. Then second offense, you're going to serve 6 months. Third offense, you could go to prison, or you could literally serve a year and lose your license forever. Now that's a possibility. You can see how the severity increased as the laws were changed.
Yeah.
Another area that we've seen tremendous advances in that has definitely added to jail populations across the state, 2 areas really. One is child support, where now the courts are very serious, and if a man or a woman violates the court orders, they're going to serve time.
And
they're
back
going to
in
go
the
to jail.
70s, that was
No, if you couldn't, bring him to court, it was, there was just no way to successfully prosecute a parent who refused or declined to pay their child support. Today, there are laws, there are interstate compacts, where if a person is working or living in another state, they can be brought back to this state to face the charges. So, I mean, the other area that I want to mention is domestic abuse. And again, I want to share this because it's something that has stuck in my mind forever. And I made a traffic stop out on APD 40 one afternoon, and there were 3 individuals in the front seat of this pickup truck. Well, only seat in the pickup truck. And I had the driver and the passenger get out. They were both men. There was a woman in the middle. And I talked to them, and they were okay, and there was no problem. And I just went around to talk to the woman in the middle to make sure she was okay. When she turned to look at me, Dee. Her face was just purple, black and blue. She had been beaten by one of the two of these characters, and I'll never know which one. But I said, "Ma'am, are you all right?" And she said, "Yeah, yeah," and just was trying to wave me away. And I said, "Well, what happened?" And she just kept trying to wave me away. And I said, "Did either one of these two do this to you?" And she said, "No, I fell down." Mm-hmm. Well, I know good and well.
Yeah.
But there was absolutely nothing that I could do without her wanting to prosecute or being willing to prosecute which of the two did this. Maybe both, I don't know. But today that wouldn't happen because the laws would allow me to make a decision not necessarily based on what she tells me, but on what I observe. And if I observe that she has been victimized, obviously victimized and I've been trained to recognize, I'm talking to me as a police officer now, the officers are trained to recognize the obvious injuries that result from a beating, such as she had, then we can make an arrest. And if we can't determine which of the two, we can arrest both of them. You know, in a circumstance where we can't determine which of the two. Now, if she's by herself, or we answer the call at home. Let's just say neighbors call. There's yelling, screaming at the house. Man answers the door. We can see in, or we ask to come in, talk to both parties, and we see that the woman has been beaten. The officers have an obligation now under the law to make an arrest, to remove who they deem to be the person who has caused the injuries, to remove them, to arrest them, and to make sure, now this is part of the law, that the victim receives the treatment that she needs and the protection that she deserves. So we're going to bring this man to jail, whether or not she, at the moment, you know, is willing to tell us it was him. He's coming to jail based on our training and our observations that, yes, he was the one that inflicted the
Now
the
she feels more confident in saying so.
So now we have a safe environment for her, whether it is at home with him removed, or if she still fears, then there are places that will temporarily house victims of this kind of domestic abuse until other arrangements can be made. So the laws are changing. So you can see how
just those three areas.
Exactly, and there are others. But society is not tolerating a lot of the behaviors, and they have criminalized them. So what does that mean? That means that, of course, the criminal justice system is really a big funnel when you think about it. The mouth is this big, and so everything's going in, and of course, right, and it all comes out at the small end. Well, a lot goes on in that part of the funnel that actually comes out into the courts. And I use that example with my students when I was teaching at Miller Mott. Not everything is going to wind up in court. A lot of things, well, thank goodness, because the courts couldn't handle it. The courts could not possibly handle it. And so the good news and the bad news of the criminal justice system is called plea bargaining. Now, the good news is through plea bargaining, 95% of criminal cases are resolved before they ever get to court. A jury trial is actually a very rare thing these days. They're an event, and I used to love when I went back and did court security for Sheriff Watson. I loved court security because the jury trial was one of the most interesting aspects, but it's also one of the more rare aspects of the criminal justice system. Now, the bad news is that the plea bargain system is what has literally threatened the constitutional rights of those that have been accused of a crime.
I see it the same way.
Absolutely. And here again, I hope there's no one out there that doubts whether or not I'm a Republican or a Democrat.
That's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant for what I'm about to say. Because I hope that our new president, President Biden, is able to follow up with his pledge, and Vice President Harris, I think she's going to be involved, in finding a way to once and for all, well, hopefully it'll become a continuing process, but to get a good start on revamping our criminal justice system, because right now it is a train wreck. Mm-hmm. And mainly because one of the big reasons is because we have become so dependent and so reliant on plea bargaining that we have I think anyway, a substantial number of people who are serving sentences for crimes that they have been accused of committing, who may or may not have committed them. That doesn't matter. What matters is if they had gone to trial, the state could never have proved it. And so what people have to grasp is, being accused of a crime is one thing. Being found guilty of a crime by 12 people of your peers is a totally different matter. That aspect, that critical aspect of the Constitution, of our rights, yours and mine, has been circumvented by the sheer volume of cases that are coming into this big mouth of the funnel that are not allowed to come out in the way of a trial.
We can't seek justice.
There's no way. So what would I do? Ideally, if I was king for a day, I'd do away with plea bargains. I'd say there'll be no more.
You either prove they're guilty or they're not.
State, prove it. Okay, if you're going to bring them to court, if you're going to arrest that person, in other words, strip them of all of their constitutional rights,
scare him to death.
Well, absolutely, it wouldn't be. Yeah. But if you're going to drag this person into the criminal justice, into this big end of the funnel, okay, have your act together, be ready to prove it. But what I'm afraid of, Dee, is that, and I've seen it in my career, where the sloppiness, or maybe not quite tying up all of the loose ends, doesn't matter if this person somewhere in that funnel is offered such a good deal that they can't possibly turn it down, even if they're innocent.
And it's not like they're taking the better deal. They're just saying, I can either have a slap on the wrist or they're going to cut my throat.
Exactly.
It's not like.
Yeah. Well, here's the other thing too.
It's like it's not what they've pleading guilty to, but it's what might happen if they don't win.
Exactly. Well, let me one of the best cases, and I don't know how familiar you are with the case of Casey Anthony down in Florida.
I am, yeah.
This was a classic case study, and we can learn a lot from that case because for your audience that doesn't know, Casey Anthony was accused of murdering her 3-year-old child, and there was some belief that her father was complicit in the cover-up of the burying of the child several miles from the home. And there was the state put all of their eggs in one basket, and that was first-degree murder. There was no consideration of any lesser included charges. Could the child have died accidentally? Possible. These things. Well, the state did not prove their case, and people say, "Well, how in the world can you agree with the jury's verdict in that case?" Well, I've studied that case. I've spent hours and hours. The state didn't prove the case.
They didn't prove what they were.
Beyond a doubt, beyond a doubt. And that's where the proof must lead you, beyond a doubt, if you're going to find that person guilty. And the state of Florida did not prove their case. And so I've used that in teaching students as an example of why it is so important for each arrest, for each person that's being brought into the system, for that arresting agency to be prepared to go to court and to prove its case, and not to assume anything.
Not to assume that they're going to plead it out.
Either plead it out, or that the circumstances are so horrible that jury is going to overlook the fact that, the state didn't. I still have doubt. And the defense did a wonderful job building doubt. And I won't go into a lot of the details, but it's a fascinating case. But they didn't erase the doubt in the minds of those jurors. Well, I've had students ask me, and other people say, "Well, how in the world could they not find her guilty?" I said, it's simple. The state didn't prove their case. So we need to be prepared to prove our case. And I don't think, as long as plea bargains are in effect, are available, we're doing a really good job of that. I think that too many times people are tempted to take the easy way out, even though they may or may not be guilty of what they've been charged with, simply to avoid the tougher consequences if they do go to trial. And I hope that any of the prosecutors that I've dealt with over the years would be honest, and I know they are, but would be frank in saying, yes, we try to make going to trial as unattractive as possible. So we make sure that we are asking for demanding, yes, the maximum. If we go to trial, this is what you're facing, as opposed to take this plea bargain offer, and it's a lot less than what you'll get if you're found guilty.
And if you don't do nothing, we'll sponge it or we'll do something.
Exactly.
So what are they going to?
Yeah.
How are you going to take that chance? There's too broad of a range.
Exactly. And you'll have some of these career criminals that'll say, I can do 5 years standing on my head, and they may or may not have been guilty, but they can still do the time. And I know that it's not a popular issue or a popular
I would think
debate
that
out
would
there.
be. I would think that would be a popular thing to try to get arrest for what they did that you can prove, and let it go at that. Either you prove it or you don't.
Well, there's no way though that the way our system is set up that it can handle the volume of cases of court.
Now,
cases.
what if they didn't? Is one of the reasons, talking about some stuff you can put people in jail for now that you couldn't in the 70s. Is there things that you hear of these nonviolent crimes and these? How much do they attribute to the courts being overrun? I mean, a guy's caught with an aspirin in
Exactly.
college or a marijuana. I mean,
Well, excellent question.
I mean,
excellent question, and it is again an issue that we have to deal with. The first question should be: Does that person really need to be in that prison bed to protect society? Does that person really need to be there?
or is he just a damage to himself
Well,
and to his own property?
Yes, or are there other ways that we can deal with that person? And again, I'm in a unique position because I'm never going to run for anything again as long as I live. So I can talk freely, and I can talk with some basis of experience. The drug war has become a farce. We have got to wake up as a society, as a country, and say, look, we've lost. We've lost if we are going to try to work our way out of the drug problem by making every drug dealer and every drug user a criminal.
It didn't work.
It's not, and it will never work. It will never work.
It's keeping our focus on the real problems.
Well, from the real problems. Yes, exactly right. And so what can we do as a society, short of just locking them up for longer and longer periods of time? Well, here's the thing. Over the years, the legislators, for whom the most part they're trying to do the right thing, but it makes them feel good to pass these new laws that require longer sentences.
I introduced a bill.
Yes,
wow.
and they can go and campaign, and people who really don't have a clue, they think, boy, that sounds good. We're going to put that drug dealer away for 100 years. Very good. Well, does that person really need to be gone for 100 years? I don't know. That to me, we've lost it. We've lost the war on drugs. We need to come up with a better approach. And even our outgoing president, he issued a presidential pardon to a drug dealer who was literally, I believe, serving a life sentence right here out of Tennessee. So I thought that was interesting. Now, I don't know what all went on behind the scenes, but whatever.
It's another form of a plea bargain. Is what
Yes,
it is.
in a sense.
Either
it
the
is.
guy did it and broke the law, needs to be in jail, or not.
Well, and then breaking the law and making sure that law that he broke is in line with the punishment. You see, and we look at other criminal justice systems in the world. We have those that are, of course, extreme on one end. China's a good example, or even some of the other Asian countries. But then we have other countries. Britain is a good example, where you compare crimes and you compare the time that people will spend paying for those crimes, and I mean, there's no comparison.
Is that where they carry the baton instead of the gun?
Well, for the most part, I think, still.
They call them bobbies.
Yeah, but now if you go into an airport in London, you're going to see, you're going to see the real deal. But so I just think when they talk about revamping the criminal justice system, there's just so much work to be done there that can be done, but it's going to take time and it's going to take money. And we better get ready to, if we really want to revamp the system before it implodes, we've got to be ready to spend some money on it.
I mean, theoretically, we're all guilty, and we all may need to be in jail.
Theoretically, yeah.
If you read them right.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are laws that, did you come to a complete stop at the stop sign?
Oh, yeah.
That kind of thing.
I've got one in the court right now. And here's the stop sign.
Yeah.
And you stop here, and you can't see around the dumpster. So you go like that, and nobody's coming, they stop you for running red.
Yeah.
I think, nobody, 10 o'clock Sunday morning. Anyway.
Well, we got a lot of work to do, and I hope that our new president and his administration can understand where we need to go.
He ran on that,
yes.
and so did the guy in Georgia. They say, how did he win? I know how he won. No prison term for nonviolent crime.
Exactly.
It doesn't take me long to figure out why he won.
Yeah. Well, and there are some. If we're going to incarcerate people who are not violent, and who in essence represent no threat, other than they've violated some criminal statute that some legislature thought was appropriate, but they're no threat to anybody, to put them in a hard cell bed
and cost the taxpayers money.
Where in a prison, well, the last estimate I think I read where it was costing the state $120 or $30 a day to house a person in what we call a hard cell bed, not a dormitory setting, but hard cell.
No mattress.
Oh no, they would have a mattress.
Yeah.
They would meet all the minimum standards, but it is a security, a very high secure environment, as opposed to a lower security environment, a dormitory style environment, where a person who does not represent a threat can be housed in a dormitory for a third of what they can be housed in that hard cell. And so we just need to look at those kind of things. Now, the county did build a dormitory that added on, and it was originally designed to be for work release. Well, that was fine and good, except there were issues there. It could never be used only for work release inmates. And so what every sheriff has done since I was in office is move some of your nonviolent people out of the more secure areas into this beautiful dormitory that has been
for lack of room, basically.
Well, for lack of room and just common sense. I mean, it's good sense to put them in a less expensive environment because they're no threat to anybody.
Now, let's say you've got caught with, and I'm just using marijuana because everybody's trying to make it legal. You got caught with marijuana too many times, and you're going to spend. What's the time in jail? 5 years, or I don't know.
Depending on the amount.
Say 5 years. Yeah. Now they come along and they make it legal. Do they let this guy out, or is he grandfathered in?
Well, actually, no. I mean, under normal circumstances, he would still be required to serve the time that they were.
Even though now it's not.
I think
you see what I'm saying?
Oh yes, I see.
He's in jail for something that's legal now.
And I think a governor would be appropriate to
they
look
ought
at
to just
commuting
say
those sentences.
if they're going to make pass this law, they need to make everybody that's in jail for that law, or are they guilty because they committed it when it was?
Well, it was while the statute was still in place, and under those circumstances. But I mean, a governor can commute those sentences. I mean, there are ways that those people could be dealt with, but. I think we're headed in that direction. I think that marijuana will be legalized.
Or these other. What's another lesser crime? Not just marijuana, but like that's not really.
Yeah, something that probably would be accepted.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got a good one. How about gambling?
Yeah.
I mean, gambling has. I mean, that whole aspect's been turned on its head.
Now we're at the lottery every day.
Well, let me tell you what will eventually get marijuana legalized in Tennessee. The same reason that when I drive home down Dalton Pike, I pass 3 or 4 liquor stores on my way home. when the state of Tennessee realizes the amount of tax revenue that can be made off of legalizing marijuana, it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of time. They realized here in Bradley County that there would be income off the liquor stores, and now we have them, in all sections of the city.
Yeah, I remember people saying, "Why give that money to Chattanooga?"
Well, sure.
And I'm thinking, why put our drunks here?
Yeah. Well, one thing I found out the other day, I didn't realize, I knew they had it down in Georgia, but we have home delivery. We have
I guess because COVID.
Yeah. Well, no, it's just because the law allows for liquor stores in Tennessee to make home deliveries. So we have one of the outlets here in Cleveland that'll make a delivery. As long as your purchase is $30 or more, they'll home deliver. So
and Sam Cannon's pictures on the refrigerator at John Kendrick's for busting up a steal.
For busting up a steal, that's exactly right. Oh, we would go around and every so often raid what we called the bootleggers back then. Where the kids could go buy their whiskey, or the adults for that matter.
The bootleggers then didn't make it in their basement, right?
No,
they just bought it and wholesaled it.
No, they were buying from
Chattanooga
liquor stores in Chattanooga,
bringing
bringing it up. Yeah. And if you grew up here, you know who some of the infamous were. And so I had, we raided one out on 64 Highway, a particular gentleman who didn't appreciate, but it was the night before the Cleveland Bradley game back in the 70s, and the word got back to me. I was Julie director at the time that this was the place to go to buy your. If you were going to party after the game. And so I decided I would just interfere with those plans. And so and the sheriff was glad, and he cooperated beautifully, Sheriff Lawson. And so we raided all of the bootleggers, but this one in particular I had interest in. Well, we took him to court, up at criminal court, and he caught me out in the hall after he had pled guilty, and he was fined $50 in costs. Of course, we had confiscated a lot of half pints from his establishment, and after he let me know what he thought of me and my mother, he then told me that he appreciated the fact that I had raided him, that he couldn't buy the publicity he got for $50.
I guess, yeah.
So, I mean, it was kind of a cat and mouse game back then, but now it's perfectly legal, and we have the outlets, right.
Now they got people making it. What they call that, the guzzler down there, that thing where you bring your own.
Well, I don't know.
Now they even call it a craft or something like.
Of course you have moonshine distilleries up in Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, different places. So I mean, society's attitude has changed. Cleveland, Bradley County's attitude has changed in that aspect, and I think that it will change as it relates to marijuana.
Or the next thing. We don't even know what that is.
Yeah, that is true.
We have no idea what that is.
But one other issue that I hope the new administration will address is, and it's there, and if people want to deny it, that's fine. But I know it's there, and that's the racial discrimination within the criminal justice system. And they say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, let me give you an example. All right, you could take a kid from the best part of town here in Cleveland, and he's charged with whatever, okay? And his parents go out and they hire the finest attorney on Courthouse Square. I won't mention any names, but there's some excellent attorneys. You take the same kid that lives over here in East Cleveland, and he's black. His parents may not be able to afford that defense attorney. So what are they going to do? They're going to have the public defender. Well, now, I don't mean to disparage the public defender. They do a great job, and they do what they can do. But here, you're going to have a law firm that basically will say, okay, well, you fill out the check, and I'll put the numbers in when we're through. And you're going to have the public defender who is overworked, understaffed, and he's going to see that plea bargain laid out there in front of him.
Which one's he going to take?
So you've got, over here, the system is going to say, ooh, we're going to have to go up against the best attorney in town. So maybe we better just offer them a first offender type of deal, okay? No jail time, fine and cost, a little public service, same crime now. Okay, but here comes this kid who's going to take the plea bargain of maybe serving 30 days or 60 days or whatever.
Get his name wrote down somewhere.
Exactly. Well, now he's going to have a criminal record. This one may be a first offender. He may be able to have his record expunged after he completes his probation. This kid, probably not.
All because they were born to different parents.
Exactly. Well, and different resources, different assets available to them. And they say, well, can that work in reverse? Absolutely it can. You ever heard of O.J. Simpson? O.J. Simpson, in my opinion,
so it may not necessarily be race, but just money.
It is a matter of money, and that's what I said a few minutes ago when I said we better get ready to pay for it if we're serious about it, because that kid from East Cleveland, in my opinion, regardless of race, color, creed, doesn't matter. He deserves the same level of representation as that kid from the good part of town.
To me, that's unconstitutional.
It is, absolutely. And so it forces this kid into the plea bargain aspect of that big funnel, whereas this kid barely gets inside and he's right back out. Well, good for him. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying it wasn't also available to this kid. And so we've got to fill that gap. We've got to make absolutely certain that every young person, old person, doesn't matter, regardless of their
It's more of a crime for a young person, though, don't you think?
Well,
they've got to live with that.
And you know, probably, I don't know what the percentages are, but I'm going to just guess 75-80% of the people that enter that funnel are in their 20s, teens, 20s, 30s. I found that most of the time there's a couple of things that will cause a person to finally go straight, and I could mention many names, but I won't. Is finally they start to get a little age on them. Usually it's around 35 to 40, and if it's a male who has been in this revolving door for years, they finally find a good woman that actually can have a good influence on them and start to straighten them out and make a family person out of them.
So age or merit or
but
a
age,
woman.
yeah, age, and they finally just grow up. They finally just say, you know what, I've spent half of my adult life in prison or 3/4 of my life in jail. This isn't worth it anymore. I want to try to straighten up. Had one of my favorites because I chased him around as a juvenile back in the late 70s. And then that continued on. And I'd lost track of him for years and years. Hadn't heard a word about him.
Did you miss him?
Well, I did kind of in a way. But he came in to pay his taxes.
Uh-huh.
And I have the privilege and honor of working with Mike Smith and his wonderful staff, just during the busy season.
Tim Akins works there.
Tim Akins works there.
He's a great guy, isn't he?
He is amazing. I'm just going to tell you.
He's an athlete, too.
And he'll be watching this, and well, he thinks he's an athlete.
He is. He is. I'll tell you.
He set some sort of records at pickleball, and he has put 1 million miles on his bicycle. So
I've ridden bikes with him,
really
and he is amazing.
Well, there's no question. What's even more, he's one of the most intelligent individuals I've ever worked with in my life.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, I'll have to say, because I work right next to him for 5 months out of the year, and it's a privilege. It really is an honor. But all of the people there, David Swallows and Victor Walker and all of the folks.
Yeah, David. I like David.
Well, Mike has a great crew there.
David's so calm.
And he's been there.
He should have been a therapist.
That's true. Yeah, he doesn't
very
get excited.
Calming. You go. He just makes it like it's okay.
David would have been an excellent teacher because he's patient. And he teaches.
You ever notice he'll go like this?
Yes, he does, as a matter of fact. Tim Akins is a person that could have been successful at anything he would have ever chosen.
Anything.
And I've told him, I said, Tim, you could have been the best detective. Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, he would have
done good at whatever he did.
Yeah, absolutely. But a great crew. But anyway, this individual came in to pay his taxes. And I hadn't seen him in years. And you own property when you come in, and I said, so you own your place?
Yeah.
Yeah. He had a little place down in McDonald, and it was just, I was amazed to see grandchildren, and all this. And so,
this is the guy that you chased and he ran.
Oh, yeah, we chased, of course, as a juvenile back in the late 70s.
Yeah.
So, there are success stories out there, and we forget about those. We really do. We forget about the ones that have really straightened up and have really changed their lives.
And that's what it's all about, right? In the end.
It is. But we've got a lot of work to do. Because that is a huge gap. Had O.J. Simpson not had the resources that he had and was able to pay for the defense team that he had, chances are, if he had to depend on what was available through the system to defend him, and this is California, so I'm not aware of what I assume that there would have been a public defender involved, or maybe an appointed attorney. But at any rate, I feel like, and this is just conjecture on my part, that he might have taken a plea bargain. He might have taken a lesser included offense, other than first-degree murder, 2 counts, because he didn't have any other options.
Well,
but fortunately,
you would almost be smart too if you're looking at, I could lose this, or I can take this.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like playing blackjack in a casino.
Yeah.
You can either take the win, or you can double down.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'll just take the win.
And that's that. And see how that's robbing people of
it's actually taking
their
the law.
Constitutional guarantees.
It is.
Yeah.
Because you're guaranteed. What is that? You're guaranteed a
right to trial.
Right to trial.
Everyone has
a
the
right to a
trial.
speedy and convicting of people of non-violent crimes and putting them in jail is compromising their free to a right and speedy trial.
If they're forced to accept that plea bargain, because there's no other options out, no other realistic options out there for them, and that's what's got to be fixed.
I don't know how you fix that.
Well, they're going to have to get serious. I mean, I can see building courthouses and establishing courtrooms and digging deep and paying what it's going to cost to return that constitutional guarantee to every individual that the state, its police agencies, determined must come into that funnel. Okay, if that determination is made, that we as a society, we as a county, city, state, and nation have to guarantee that if our agents, our police, reach out and bring someone into that funnel, that we have at the same time guaranteed them every constitutional right that is out there for them, which includes the kind of defense that a person who with means could afford to buy. We have got to provide that for them if they can't afford it. It's got to be equalized.
To determine if they're guilty.
Well, here's the thing, and it's another thing that people have a misconception about. It's sort of a pet peeve of mine, because I'll hear people say, with good intentions, we're going to get justice for the victim. We're going to get justice for the victim. Find one reference in the Constitution of the United States of America to the victim. It's all about the guaranteeing the rights of the accused. Mm-hmm. So instead of being focused on getting justice for the victim, which I can understand.
Sure.
I can understand that. Our focus should be solely on getting justice, ensuring justice for the accused. That's what our Constitution is all about. It's not about securing justice for the victim.
That's an added bonus and whatever.
Well, that comes later, because that's part of the court's function after the person is tried and found guilty of whatever offense that they were accused of. Then the courts can deal with the punishment and the restitution, whatever it might be, the reimbursement. That is seeking the justice for the victim. Mm-hmm. And the judges in certain circumstances can put the penalty down, or the juries can do that. So there is ample opportunity once the criminal justice system has operated and has functioned for there to be justice for the victim. That's way down the line. That's in that little part of the funnel that comes out.
Only if.
Yes, but to seek justice for the victim in the course of that justice
that's
system
almost
operating,
tainting the revelation of whether this person is guilty of that crime.
Exactly.
Because they're so focused. You ever heard the old saying, they had to find somebody guilty?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Somebody had to pay.
Somebody had to pay. And that's why the system, the way that we look at things is wrong. It's just wrong. And I say we as a society.
Where did we get that? Where did that begin?
I don't know, because when you look back at the writing of the Constitution and the things that were important to our founding fathers, one of those was trial by jury, because they were being denied that by the British. And so I'm not going to turn this into a history lesson, it became very important.
So in other words, one reason we came, in writing that, one thing the American people didn't want or wanted was the right to a jury trial.
Yes, absolutely. Now, what has happened in the meantime? Well, of course, what we've seen is an explosion the last 100 years or so of the number of cases that are going into the system. And what we've not seen is the growth of the court aspect of the system to take care of these increased numbers. So again, the funnel stays in effect, except the mouth is just getting wider and wider, but the little part of the funnel is just staying the exact same size or maybe growing a little bit, but nowhere near to keep up with the numbers. And so what is the solution? Is it to arrest less people? No. Is it to legalize truly heinous behaviors and conduct? No. What is the solution, unfortunately, is the plea bargain. And that's what's keeping it going, but that's also what's robbing a substantial percentage of the people that come into the system of their rights to a trial by jury. By a right to be, to demand, this is important, for the state to prove its case. A plea bargain doesn't prove anything other than...
It proves nothing.
It proves that a deal was laid out on the table that the defendant couldn't turn down, or was talked into taking by a well-meaning attorney.
And by now, everybody knows that. They say, they pleaded out. We don't even know. We didn't determine if anybody was guilty.
An average person will take a plea bargain. I mean, I'm talking about just here, okay, so-and-so, well, he pled guilty. He took a plea bargain. He must be guilty.
Or that's all he could afford.
Well, the fact that we think, well, he must be guilty is not true. It's not true. He may or may not be guilty. We can't assume that he is, simply because he was offered a bargain that he couldn't turn down.
If I hear somebody took a plea bargain, I assume, don't know. I assume they weren't guilty. It's what I assume.
But they had to take the plea bargain.
But they had to take the plea bargain because they couldn't afford. Now, I've heard people say, I didn't have a trial by jury because it was too expensive.
Well, okay. There's part of that problem that we're going to have to solve.
Do you have to pay this guy that's come from a poor house, or maybe he's had medical expenses and he can't have a trial by jury. He can only have a plea bargain.
Well, he could, and it would be a very rare circumstance that a person, let's say, that's being defended by the public defender's office would actually wind up in a jury trial, and it does happen. And again, I mean, my hats are off to the public defenders. They do a wonderful job, considering all of the circumstances. That crew is wonderful, and they just, we couldn't ask for any better.
They're only getting paid by who?
Well, they're paid by the state through the some sort of defense fund, and the courts actually manage that, and they set the rates of the pay and that kind of thing. But they can only do so much. And again, let's put the human factor into it. And I'm just going to throw some figures out there, and they're probably wrong, but I think they're in proportion, probably fairly accurate. If you have an assistant district attorney who is going to handle a number of prosecutions, and let's say they have 30 active cases, that's quite a caseload, because you're preparing 30 cases as if they're actually going to go to trial. 29 of them are going to be plea bargained out. One of those 30 might get to trial.
And they don't know which one.
They really don't. Well, they might have a sense of which one because they can see the attorney. They know which attorneys are representing who. And of course, the attorney is going to be paid more. The deeper that case goes into the system, that private attorney will expect to be paid more for that, of course. So they can kind of get a sense, he or she can, of what may wind up before a jury and what probably won't. Public defenders, on the other hand, they're going to have 60 or 80 or 90 cases. And they're trying to balance them like the juggler in the circus. And it's impossible for them to even put the attention into one of their cases that the prosecutor can put in, because they've got twice as many cases to be concerned about. And so again, you can feel the pressure building for the plea bargain. And so who's going to get caught in the middle of all this? It's that guy that's been drugged into the system by our agents. Our police have brought this person in and said to that person in writing, in a warrant, in the body of their warrant, I can prove in front of 12 of your peers that you did what I'm accusing you of doing, and here's my proof. And so they're putting it down there, and they're swearing to it, knowing that the chances are it will never get before a jury. Ever.
But the fact that they wrote it down scares you to death.
Well, sure it does. Absolutely it does.
He knows something I don't know.
Well, eventually they would know it because, of course, there's discovery involved. But, that's basically getting back to Casey Anthony. I think they expected her to plea bargain that out. They never expected that to go to trial. I don't think, who in the world would take a case that heinous, that horrible, and put that before a jury? With only one charge.
Who would argue her defense, basically?
Well, she was able to hire some very, very good attorneys. Her parents were wealthy enough to hire some of the best attorneys that were available. And they created the doubt in the minds of those 12 jurors. And again, we're not seeking justice for that child. That's not what the criminal justice system is about.
That'd be a witch hunt, wouldn't it?
Well, it would in a way. Now, there would have been a time, had she been found guilty, that yes, now the system can say, we are going to find justice for that victim. We're going to put her away for the rest of her life. We're going to put her on a gurney.
That's a whole separate issue.
Exactly. Totally separate. What happened successfully in that case was the state reached out through their agents, brought her into the funnel, and they said, okay, there's not going to be any compromise here. We're gonna go for the whole 9 yards on you. And what they didn't do is take into account the quality of her defense and the fact that they had holes in their case. They were so confident that once it got to trial, if it did, that she would be found guilty because of the heinous nature. The horror of that case would color the minds and the opinions of that jury to overlook the holes in their case. Well, and I'm going to say this with all due respect to every party involved, those 12 people had the courage to say, wait a minute, no, this is horrible, and we can't understand in our minds and hearts how anybody could murder this beautiful child. And we would love to put her behind bars for the rest of her life. But we can't do it because we were sworn as jurors to look at the evidence, to judge the evidence, and to see if it proves in our minds beyond a reasonable doubt that she indeed committed the crime. And they couldn't do it. They could not overlook.
And from that, we almost have to assume that maybe she wasn't guilty.
It's highly possible.
That was the outcome.
I've heard some of the jurors, and they're you can hear two or three of them were interviewed after the case was over, and they will tell you they said that the state failed to give us any options. We had nothing to choose from other than their argument that she killed the child and then she buried the child, basically. We believe that the child. Now this is one part of the interview. And two or three of them expressed this, we believe the child died accidentally. And that she and perhaps another person, her father, maybe, helped her to bury the body and then to claim that the child had been kidnapped or whatever. And had they had the appropriate charges that would be commensurate with those circumstances, they would have chosen those charges and found her guilty. But they weren't on the table. And so, that's a good example of the criminal justice system. It worked because those 12 people, while the state would love for them to have been thinking, I'm going to serve justice for that victim by sending her mother to prison for the rest of her life. They didn't do that. They took their oath seriously. And they weighed the evidence and found that they still had a reasonable doubt. And even though they would love to have sent her to prison, they couldn't do it. And so the system worked beautifully, but it only worked because she could afford the very best defense. If she had had a public defender, I doubt very seriously if the outcome would have been anywhere close to what it was.
Should have pleaded out long time
Well, she would have
before.
almost had to.
Yeah.
Because of the fear that the quality of defense that she was being afforded could not meet that horror and that sense of wanting to even things up and seek justice for the child. I don't think she could have taken that risk. I don't see how she could have. But she had such a great defense team. Well, somebody had to pay for that. And she and her family did. Could a poor young mother from some the poor side of Orlando have been able to afford that? No.
No.
So whether or not she actually murdered the child wouldn't have been important. It's what kind of deal would have been.
It would be a matter of just, I got to get out of this quick because I got to look out for my other kids, or I got to go back to my job.
Or just take the best deal I could get, and so the system worked, and that's I think that's the challenge of this new administration, is to look at cases like that and say, okay, now why did they work? Well, the obvious question, the answer to that question is the level of quality of defense. And the fact that there was a criminal trial, there was a trial by jury, like the Constitution says should be. And so how do we get that for every person that wants a trial by jury because they've got adequate defense, a good enough defense?
And it was in our Constitution.
Absolutely it is. Now what's happened, the system, the mouth of the funnel is just too big. And it's
maybe we've got too many rules that people can break.
Well, some people would argue that, I'm sure. I've always said this about Cleveland, Bradley County. Of course, I love this community. It's not my home where I grew up, but I've been adopted here.
You've been here long enough.
I think so.
You've been here longer than I have.
People say, well, where's your home? I say, well, of course, it's Cleveland, Bradley County. So, but I've always referred to Cleveland and Bradley County as a high-maintenance community. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing at all. But what that means, though, and this is kind of tradition here in Cleveland, Bradley County, certain behaviors and certain conduct are not tolerated as they are in some communities that are lower maintenance type communities.
So what's one of those examples?
Well, here in Cleveland, for example, people who exhibit, let's just say, unusual behavior, who may be suffering from some sort of mental problems, emotional problems, may be homeless, may live in one of the public housing places. Their behaviors in public places would not be tolerated, as it would be in a large city like Chattanooga or Orlando or any place like that, where those people are just sort of overlooked. They're part of the backdrop of an urban setting. Here in Cleveland, no, that's not true, and so that has added over the years to the jail population and the difficulty that the jail and corrections have had dealing with people with mental or emotional challenges. And the jails, not only here, but I think most places have become mental health facilities, because we don't send anybody. There are no more mental health facilities, or if there are, they're very limited.
Where would you even send them?
Exactly. So you put them in jail, because you don't want them harassing shoppers or people going into restaurants and they're out soliciting, or they're displaying what could be interpreted as unusual or even threatening behavior.
Yeah.
So the police or the sheriff's office are going to do what the community expects them to do, and they're going to remove that disturbance from public display, and they're going to bring it to the jail. Well, the jail is not a mental health provider.
They're just going to be that way in 4 days.
Exactly. And so, but we get to house them, and we get to pay for their psychotropic drugs, and we get to make sure that they're taken care of. And so, and in a time when the backlog of cases is just getting worse and worse and worse, that person could be in jail for days or weeks or months until their case is heard. And it may only because they're there only because they are displaying behaviors that are not acceptable in a high maintenance community. Whereas if they were displaying the same behaviors in Chattanooga or Orlando or Atlanta, they would just be overlooked. The police would just go on by. They wouldn't.
Being in the county sheriff, did you do much in the city, or is it just that's the line? Because the city's in the county.
It should be a line. It should be, and there should be mutual respect. And there usually was. We tried to keep that level of respect with the police chiefs that I worked with over the years, and I think we did a good job on that. I think the people in the county expect the county deputies to be patrolling and to be active in the county. We have a wonderful city police. We have an excellent city police department here. People don't appreciate it. When people come in and say, why do I have to pay city and county taxes? I say, well, for one thing, living in the city, you have excellent police protection. You have excellent fire protection, excellent schools, roads are in great shape. I mean, you've got a lot. And now, and let's just say the county is doing an excellent job too. The sheriff's department and Sheriff Lawson, they're doing a great job, and I couldn't expect them to do any better. Sure. They're just doing a great job, and but they're doing the job where they need to be doing the job, and that is in the county and the city.
Not in the city, even though the city's in the county.
Correct, and they do have authority, of course. The county deputies can perform any kind of law enforcement function they need to in the city, but the way that we have it laid out here, we have 3 departments, and that's very unusual for a county our size, 100,000.
3 departments.
We have three law enforcement. Charleston City Police Department, which is a good, solid little department. I mean, they run a good show up there. It's a good department. The city of Cleveland has an excellent police department, one of the best in the state of Tennessee. Our sheriff's department is one of the best sheriff's departments in the state of Tennessee. So we're blessed here with good, solid law enforcement that works well together. City will come out to back up the county. The county will come in to back up the city. They work
Charleston
together.
Back up?
Absolutely.
Are they allowed?
Absolutely.
Who gives them that authority?
The whatever insurance that they're under has laid out certain stipulations for them to go out into the county. Now, once they go out into the county, they would be operating under the color usually of the sheriff. If the sheriff's deputy comes into the city, because they have jurisdiction in the city, they would continue to operate under the color of the sheriff. So I don't know if that makes any sense at all. I'm sorry.
So it's almost like it's the insurance company
has a lot
drawing who can go.
At one time,
if somebody walks in here right now and starts to shoot me, I pick up the phone. I call 911.
Yes.
The Charleston City Police could theoretically say, "I'm close. I'll come in."
Well, let's just say, for instance, if they had come to Cleveland for whatever reason.
Yeah, they would just happen to be by here.
And they just have, they could stop.
Heard it on the scanner.
Absolutely. Yes, if it was a situation where, life or death or imminent injury.
Who else would have the authority?
Sheriff's deputies would have the authority.
City of Cleveland.
And, of course, the city of Cleveland.
And who else?
Well, you'd have the Highway Patrol.
They would have authority?
Oh, absolutely. They would, absolutely. Then you have any of the federal agencies that might be here. I don't know, the FBI still has an office in Cleveland.
What about, now Lee College, I know they've got security guards.
They do have security, and to my knowledge, I don't think they are a police agency. Now, the security at Cleveland State is now a police agency. And so they have police powers. I don't think Lee University has that has risen to that level.
That's who deems that?
The state of Tennessee.
They said you have police powers.
Correct, and that would be through. They would have to go through meet all of the requirements that are laid down by the state academy, and
so Cleveland State could be driving.
Cleveland State could be absolutely.
They could say, "Oh, we're in the area. We'll go."
Well, they're all well trained, and they have the equipment, and absolutely.
In theory, you could have a homeowners association that was so progressive that they would have their own and get certified.
No, they would never be certified because you'd have to be a full time. You'd have to. There are so many stipulations involved.
But I mean, in
as far
theory,
as training and they could. No, they would have to be attached to a state. Or a state
or a municipality,
local, yes, an entity.
Okay.
Or a university. Now, for instance, Vanderbilt, they have a full, UTC, that's even a closer to home example. They are a fully certified police agency, the UTC police.
Because
they've met all the requirements and the training. All of their officers have been through the basic academy, which is now, I think it's 16 weeks.
That would be a very large responsibility to take on that.
Oh,
certification.
It is. Well, how long has Cleveland State been with us? Since 1967? And it was only up about 5 years ago that they became a certified police agency.
Now, for the average guy watching TV at night, it's 10 o'clock, you're sitting in front of the TV, would we have no idea what crimes could be going on or what? I mean, I assume that we live in a bubble that we don't know about.
Dee, you're exactly right. Yes.
Now, if we knew that, the Bible says wisdom increases sorrow. So if we knew all of that, wouldn't that be depressing?
it would be depressing, but it would also at the same time be enlightening. And I think the best experience, a person who lives in the bubble and really has no contact with the criminal justice system other than what they see on television, the best experience they could have would be to serve on a grand jury. And I would encourage anyone who is summoned in to jury duty to grab that opportunity to see what really is going on in their community.
But
outside
wouldn't
of the
that
bubble.
isn't the ignorance bliss? I mean, while I was sheriff, did you ever think, man, I got to get out of this business. It's I mean, knowing all the bad stuff.
Well, people always say or ask me, well, what are some of the things that you remember? What are things that stick with you? Well, unfortunately, it would be the crime scenes and the horror of what one man can do to his fellow man, and those are things that will never go away. Those are things I can close my eyes and or riding through the county, and I remember there was a murder here, and
like PTSD or something.
In almost a sense, yeah, but it's
if I'm driving down so and so road and I say, oh, there's a nice house there with a fence or something.
Yeah.
You might drive by that road and say, I remember when.
Exactly. Yeah, and I made a point of getting to every crime scene. Not every crime scene, but of course if it was a murder, for instance, or a particularly serious crime, because I wanted to be able to work with my detectives. I didn't want to do their job, but I wanted to be able to work with them and to support them. And I felt like to be the kind of support they needed, I needed to sense exactly what they were dealing with and the kind of circumstances that they were trying to deal with. And so I went to every one, there's some that that just will stay with me. But the public needs to know what their hard-earned tax money is going towards. And when we make an argument that we need more patrol officers or we need more detectives or we need more corrections officers, it's hard for them to understand why, because they don't need them personally. They've never had to call one to their home. They don't have any sense of what may be going on outside of the bubble in places or in parts of the city or county that they don't normally travel in or they don't have business in. And so they need to know. They really need to know. And, crime is going to be with us forever. It's a part of the human factor. And there's no way of getting around it. And I think the more a person is educated to what is actually going on in the community, the more they will appreciate the jobs that are being done by the law enforcement officers, the corrections officers, the detectives, the administrative and support staff. And they'll realize that, yes, my tax money is being spent wisely and efficiently and in a manner that is necessary. Of course, I had experience working on the state level for 7 years with the Tennessee Department of Homeland Security. And what I came to appreciate in those 7 years, well, I appreciated a lot of it and learned a lot, obviously, but the amount of actual waste, tax waste on the local level is so minute. I mean, it is almost non-existent because every office holder, including the sheriff, including the city council people, they're squeezing every nickel, every penny out of every tax dollar they're squeezing. Now, as it goes up to the next level, the state, I saw more waste there, and it hurt because I grew up and worked for 30 plus years in an environment where you couldn't afford waste. There was no waste. There was no waste to be had.
You had to explain why you needed 2 chairs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, there's a story that Sam Cannon had told. I get them confused. They were both good friends and good mentors for me. But Sam needed a new tire on one of the 2 or 3 patrol cars that he had. This is back in the 60s. Yeah. We had a judge at the time, a county judge by the name of Fulbright, who had a reputation for being extremely careful about the way money was spent. And when Sam went up to ask for money to buy a new tire to put on his patrol car, Judge Fulbright said, no, I believe you can just put a tube in it. It'll be fine. Well, we've come a long way from those days. But that's the kind of scrutiny that goes into the requests that the county office holders make of the county commission every year. They scrutinize every aspect of your request right down to the penny. And so you've got to be ready to justify. Now, on the state level, it gets a little looser, and I saw some monies that could have been spent better or in other ways that I thought would be more appropriate. But, I can say that every office holder that I've ever worked with, and I had the wonderful honor of working with some just amazing, professional, caring office holders here in Bradley County. They were wonderful. There was no waste. There wasn't any. And the people of Bradley County can rest assured. And we one of the things we try to do at the tax office, and one of the reasons I enjoy working there so much, and this is Mike Smith's philosophy, is that we know people are not coming in to visit.
Yeah.
They're not coming in because we've got something to give away or it's just a great place to come into and talk. We know they're there for a reason that they would rather not be there for. So we try to make it as pleasant as we can, and we talk and we converse and we kind of cut up a little bit, and while we're not wasting time, especially if we're busy, we want to make sure every taxpayer that comes in feels like, well, that was a positive experience. And so we tell them, well, we may not have been able to be painless, but at least we were fast, or whatever.
Yeah.
Try to make it a good environment, and so, but one of the things I'll tell them if they complain about their taxes, which they're free to do, and certainly we'll listen because we're paying the same rate they are, personally, is I say, I worked on a lot of county budgets in my day, and when I left out of the sheriff's office, we were up to about $26 million in combined budgets, and that's quite a climb from where I started. My first budget as chief deputy was $285,000. So we went from $285,000 up to over $26 million in my experience at the sheriff's office. But I said, of that $26 million, I can assure you there wasn't a penny wasted. There's no money wasted. It's not thrown away. It's spent as wisely.
And the jail wasn't overbuilt. We've grown into it.
Oh yeah, and we've grown over time. But I wanted to say this too. So, talking about some of the office holders that I had the privilege and honor to work with. There was a couple that stand out. Mike Smith, I've mentioned before. He was at the time on the commission, along with Cleaston Runyon, the late Cleaston Runyon, who was my law enforcement committee chairman for many, many years. I wanted to point out those two in particular as being the movers and the shakers that helped me put in what I consider to be the crown jewel, I guess you could say, of my administration, and that is the School Resource Officer Program. And, I won't go into a lot of detail. We don't have the time to talk about how important that program is. But just from a security standpoint, another good friend, old friend, Herbert Lackey, while he was principal at Black Fox, when he had his School Resource Officer on duty for a couple of years, went before the school board of the commission one and told them that if he was forced to choose between an assistant principal and that school resource officer, he would take the school resource officer. It had become that important to him as the administrator of Black Fox University down there. It's a huge school, a big school.
Yeah. And that's so, a lot coming from Herbert Lackey.
That is a lot coming from him. Of course, he's an old and dear friend. But it underscored how in a short period of time, the administrators, and I'm sure they were speaking also on behalf of the teachers, the parents, the grandparents, and even the students, about how important that school resource officer was to that school in that short period of time. And so I wanted to thank them publicly, and I do whenever I get a chance, for being so supportive. The entire commission at the time saw the value in it. We were suffering nationwide from a number of incidents at schools where the lives were being lost.
We wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't want to send my kids to school without one now.
Well, especially in Bradley County, we have taken on a philosophy in the schools that the large elementary schools are preferable to maybe smaller ones that are located throughout the community. And that's that decision, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's reality. And so we have some very large elementary. I mean, I don't know the numbers. They're professionals that could.
But they're large.
They're large. They're very large, and some would argue that maybe they're too large. But that's for other people to debate. They're excellent. I mean, we have such good schools and good school administrators and teachers. We
don't have any fear of going to any schools. Our kids. I can't think of a bad school in Cleveland or Bradley.
Well, the school resource officer, and when that patrol car is parked out, marked car, as a billboard out in front of that school that says, "We care." It doesn't necessarily say you can't come in and do what you have in your mind to do, because chances are they could, unless the officer just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But what it is saying is there are other places to go that are not as well protected than this particular school. So if you have something in mind, you better go someplace else, because that officer just might be at the door. He might be in that office when you come in to do your dirty deeds, and he's going to take care of business. And you know, when we first started the program, I'll give you just a quick background on it. We knew that there were grants available. We could ease into it without having to raise taxes and do it over a period of time. But one of the requirements was the school system had to initiate the request for law enforcement to assume a presence. Well, that was okay. Yeah. Because until they felt like they needed them, we didn't want to put them in the school. Until they felt like they were needed, then they would be welcomed. And so I had an officer that had been through the training. He was ready. He was still on patrol. Dean Anderson was his name, and we were waiting for the call. Well, word was getting out that there were police officers being assigned to schools in other areas around it. And so I get a call from Bill Winters at Bradley Junior at the time, Bradley Junior High. And he says, "We understand there's a program that would put an officer in our school. Are there any available?" And I said, "Bill, yes. I've been waiting on your call." And so we met with them the next day. Dean was put into that school, and he became, over time, after a while, he became the instructor of criminal justice up at Walker Valley. But and so we have Dean in place, and so I'm waiting for the second call, because I think I know where it's going to come from. And it did. It came from my old friend, Mr. Hughes at Bradley. Dale was the principal at Bradley at the time, and he said, "Hey, Dan, where's my office?" So the second one was placed there at Bradley. Then I think we placed a third one at, I guess it was at Charleston.
So they go there every day?
Oh, their assignment. All day long? That's their assignment, absolutely.
Wouldn't that be a good assignment?
Well, here's the catch.
I'm sure there's more to it.
Here's the catch. What we learned the hard way, I say we as a law enforcement community, nationwide community, we learned the hard way from several unfortunate examples that the way to deal with a violent situation in a school is not to retreat and call in the backup, or call in SWAT, or call in help. An officer that's assigned to, or maybe responds to that situation in that school, has one responsibility and one responsibility only, and that is to go straight to the source of the violence, to the source of the threat, and to deal with it. And there can be no other consideration, okay? So when I would talk to an officer about becoming a school resource officer, I would tell them, "Look, I'm assigning you, or I'm offering you this because you're one of my best. You're not what we call in the business a rubber gunner, just rubber bullets." I said, "You're one of our best." Dean Anderson was one of the finest officers I had, but I wanted to put the very best in these schools, because I would tell him, this is not a soft assignment. This is not something where if you have a problem or a threat, that you can back out, make a phone call, or go out to your car radio.
Send me back up.
No, there is no backup.
They got to deal, because if you did, that'd scare everybody to death.
Exactly. You have to go to the source of that threat. You have to put your life on the line. You have to do whatever has to be done to protect those children, protect those teachers, protect those administrators. Are you willing to do that?
Without causing too much of alarm.
Well, with doing it the way that you're trained to do. Yeah. And so if they were willing to do that, and I never had one turn me down, and once they get inside the school and they understand that those children, 300-400 of them, if in an elementary school, it could be 2,000 at Bradley at times, or 1,800, they're my responsibility. This is my territory. This is my beat. This is my zone. whatever you want to call that area of responsibility. And I am the person who's been assigned to protect these lives at the risk of my own.
And I can't call 5 backups.
Well, I can get backup coming, but I can't wait on them.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we learned the hard way in several different circumstances. So it's not the cushy rubber gunner, I'm about to retire.
In other words, it's not a security guard. It's
no.
not a mall cop.
No, no. And if you looked at over the history at the city, that's the same way here in Cleveland. When Wes Snyder was chief, and then others that followed him, they wouldn't assign the guy that's going to retire in 2 years and just he's got medical problems. No, they would assign the very best, sharpest officer, best trained, ready to go, because they realized the scope of the responsibility inside of that school is more dear than any other area of responsibility we have.
And subject to more criticism, probably. Can you
Could
imagine?
be, absolutely. Oh my goodness, absolutely.
You could get
Yep. If you even
700 calls.
Yeah, you need to set the example. You need to be the very best that you can be. And so I guess that's our Marine Corps, I suppose, of law enforcement. So those officers, and so I've kept up with it. It's not that it's my place, or it's not that I could do anything about it one way or the other, but I've been curious as to the quality of officers, and I have found that every one of my successors, from Sheriff Gobble through Sheriff Ruth and Watson and now Sheriff Lawson, I don't think I'm leaving out any of them, all have maintained that same philosophy of putting the very best that we have that are willing to go in under those circumstances into those schools and protect those children. And like I said, there's nothing more dear. We can protect homes from burglary, we can protect cars from being stolen, all of these things, but when it comes to protecting children, I mean, there's nothing more important than that.
That's our main goal.
So that's why I'm so glad the program has maintained the level that we started it out at the highest level possible. And my successors obviously have felt that same obligation to keep it as strong and as vibrant as possible.
You may work at the trustee's office, but your passion is in law enforcement and
well,
I mean, I can tell in your speech you have a big passion for that.
I do. Well, the criminal justice system was my life. It turned out to be my life. And even after leaving the sheriff's office, 7 years with Homeland Security, taught at Bellarmont down in Chattanooga for 4 or 5 years, took over their criminal justice program, and enjoyed that thoroughly. But I was just ready to do something part-time and to come in off the road. That's still a pretty good drive back and forth every day to Chattanooga. But my heart will always be in it. I'm always fascinated with it. I see the flaws in it. I see the strengths in it. And I think the strengths are the people, not the system itself, but the people who are trying to make it work. That's where our strengths lie. But there's so many things that can be done to improve it, to make it what the founding fathers, I believe, originally had in mind. And that was to give everybody a chance to be justly treated if they're brought into that criminal justice system. And to do that, we've got to get back to those constitutional guarantees that we've gotten away from over the years.
Because we've brought them into it, now we have to treat them justly.
And when you think about it, when you think about putting a person under arrest, you have stripped them of every constitutional guarantee.
I hate to be ironic, but it's criminal.
Well, without proper cause.
That's criminal too.
It is, absolutely it is, because it would be an unjustified or illegal arrest. So you're exactly right. So that officer must be trained to understand what probable cause is all about, and to be able to lay out the basis of a probable cause arrest, which means that he has reason to bring that person into the system and maybe even buy a little time to build that case even better. But that probable cause must be there, number one. Number two, then the case must be airtight to the point that when it does get to a jury, and it should, if it gets to a jury, that those jurors are going to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that that person indeed did the crime that he's been accused of. We've broken down. And that's why I hope that our new administration and our new president can do something about it, but it's going to cost.
And it's going to take a while to trickle down.
Oh, I think it will, but absolutely it will. I mean, this is something that can't be done overnight. I think there's some things that can be done practically immediately. I think, and we've talked about those already, some of the things we need to examine: why people are in jail. Are they a threat to society? Are there other ways that we can deal? If we're going to take away their freedom, is there some other way that we can house them, some other way that we can care for them that is not as expensive as putting them in prison or putting them in a hard cell. There's things that need to be looked at. Are the laws that are on the books reasonable? Are they reasonable? Are they there for the right reason? And if they were placed there because the legislature wanted to feel good and they wanted to prove to the world they were dealing with a problem, so they passed these laws that creates, all of these long sentences, then we need to take let's stop and take a breath and say, okay, wait a minute. That was then, now's now. Is it still appropriate?
Maybe things are different.
And maybe things have changed. Maybe attitudes have changed. I think we're seeing that, but it's slow. It's a slow process. We need to speed it up.
Do you think, Dan, I've been reading this book about, it's called, I can't think of the name of the book, but it talks about talent stacks, like the guys, he's not an expert in this, he's not an expert in this, but all those things stacked up made him really good.
Well, no, that's an interesting concept, though.
I mean, in talking with you were a manager of a store, looking to be a manager, end up managing the
tires.
So you're able to write. You're writing for the police station. So now you see it from the consumer standpoint.
Yeah. Yes.
That allowed you to get elected because you're explaining it how people would read it. And now your administration. You see what I'm saying? This is all fit together like a puzzle.
Well, it has, and it's been an interesting journey. I'll tell you the truth, Dee. It's been interesting. Would I go back and change anything? Probably not. There's a lot of things I wish I could go back and do better or do differently, But as far as the decisions that have brought me to where I am today, you can explain it in a lot of ways, from a religious standpoint or just from fate or from certain, whatever it is. But it's been quite a journey, and it was such a privilege to serve the people of your home community of Cleveland, Bradley County for 20 years as their sheriff. I wonder if there will ever be anyone that is stupid enough to want the job for 20 years. I don't know if that'll ever happen again.
Thank goodness people still want to be there.
They do it now, but I think we've seen a shift. Frankly, 20 years, that was my career, or the bulk of it. I don't know that we'll ever have a career sheriff as such. I think what we will see are what we have seen in the past since I left, and Steve Lawson is a perfect example. He has already built a career. He's put in his time in various capacities in law enforcement. And now, as he approaches the end of his career, of a great career, now it's time for him to serve as our sheriff. It was all about timing with Steve. Now, people need to be reminded, if they don't know, that I kept him from being sheriff twice. And so we ran against each other.
You are good friends now, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I admire and respect him totally. But it was his time. It wasn't his time before, but it was his time nearly 4 years ago now, and it'll be his time again, I'm quite certain.
I'm sure, yeah.
Because he's just done a marvelous job. But I think that we'll see more, and I think whoever comes in behind him, the next one, will be a person who has built a career in various capacities in law enforcement.
Stacked his talents.
Exactly.
So
exactly. And comes in with a career of experience and training and knowledge, and has no intention of serving more than 2 or maybe 3 terms. Because it'll be time to retire, be time to enjoy life.
That's why it's not good to have a 25-year-old sheriff.
Well, now that I'm out of it, I can see the value in term limits. But only now that I'm out of politics completely. But then you get those exceptions, like a Mike Smith or Adonis Simpson. My goodness. If we had term limits, we would be shooting ourselves in the
trouble, wouldn't we?
Well, they
Stanley
don't get
Thompson.
anybody. Stanley's doing a great job. Well, our whole courthouse is doing a marvelous job.
I'm glad Stanley doesn't want to build houses. I'd be in trouble.
Be in trouble? Well, he's going to retire and build houses one of these days, so you might be in trouble. But they all do a marvelous job. And we've got a set of judges now in Bradley County that are just terrific.
We've got it all in Bradley County.
We really do. We're lucky, and I'll tell you this, we have people that'll come in occasionally that have to pay their taxes that have just moved here from New York, Staten Island, California, and I've actually had two. This happens twice in the 3 years that I've worked the counter for Mike. They will come in with their bill and they'll say, well, we've just moved here from Staten Island. Is this bill for the month or is this for an entire year? You see, they're not used to this. And when we tell them, no, that's for the full year. Well, no, there's got to be, do I get one for the schools? No. You don't get a separate bill for the roads like you do in Florida. No, it's all, that's it. And they can't believe it.
And all of that is attributed also to people like Gary Davis, who's going to squeeze every dollar too.
Absolutely, and boy, he does. And I was going to say something. I'm glad you reminded me before we finish up. I want to thank Gary too as well for having worked with me and my staff in coming up with a reasonable staffing pattern for the new jail back in 2004, because he is so conservative. It was hard on him. It was so hard, and we sat down and with the help of the county commission, but it boiled down to Gary and I sitting down like this in several meetings and just coming up with figures that he could plug into his budgeting apparatus, and I could plug into my operational apparatus and come together with something.
So you were not only a successful sheriff, but you were a successful sheriff with Gary Davis being the. That said a lot for both of you.
I was very, very fortunate to have Gary as my county executive, now of course county mayor, because I'll tell you, he kept us all on our toes. I mean, we wouldn't dare waste any money.
What's the old saying? If Gary will buy one, I'll take two.
That's right. Well, I was lucky. I had good people to work with, but if I did enjoy any success at all, it wasn't anything that I did or anything that I brought to the table. It was the people that continue to knock on the door.
You're highly underselling yourself, Dan.
But I wouldn't have been at all a success had it not been for the people who I had the privilege to work with, the quality people. And Dee, what worries me is that someday, if we don't keep salaries and benefits in proportion to what we're asking of them to do, if we don't keep that in proper proportion and make their job a job that they see as attractive, the good people will stop knocking on our door at the Justice Center and the police department, and they'll start knocking on the door at Amazon and M&M Mars and places that the pay will be commensurate with what they're being asked to do.
That's
and
right.
The benefits will be commensurate with what they're being asked to do. And I see it happening. And it's nobody's fault, but we've got to remain competitive. We've got to reach out into this community and continue to offer an attractive package of employment, not only to traditionally young white males who, for whatever reason, see it as attractive, but we've got to somehow better reflect the community that we see when we look in the mirror. And that's why. And here's the problem that we deal with in attracting minorities and females. We desperately need a better representation of our minority community and females in law enforcement and criminal justice. But so does Amazon, and so does M&M Mars, and
it needs to mirror.
But they're able to offer so much more. And so we have a real challenge on our hands. But when we look in that mirror, we as a law enforcement community in Cleveland, Bradley County, we should see looking back at us, the community as a whole. And we've got to do a better job, but we've also got to be able to offer those young people of all colors and of all genders that opportunity that they would have if they're knocking on the door at M&M Mars. We've got to be competitive. And again, how do we do that? It's going to cost. It's just going to cost. But is it worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. So we got some challenges ahead of us.
I hope that we've not seen the last of Dan Gilley as far as being active in.
Well, I don't know. I think that a lot of people say, well, we probably had enough of him. We had to put up with him for a long time.
You don't realize this, Dan, and I do because I'm looking out from the inside. But I'm looking on the outside. I'm looking in from the outside. You are an icon to Bradley County.
Well, I appreciate that.
And I don't mean that lightly.
Well, I appreciate that very, very, very much, my friend. Thank you. Very good.
What?
Really, you think so?